Good morning.
Thank you very much. Guten Morgen. It is good to be here for the first time in this beautiful place. Interlaken is a beautiful place. However, the Bahamas is also beautiful. And I thought that you would want to know that the Bahamas is a good place for you to come when it snows here in Interlaken. So this is my home. This is 2 minutes from my house. I just thought I'd make you depressed for one moment. I also want to show you where I spend most of my time when I'm home. This is what I look at most of my life. I take a walk on the beach in the Bahamas. I know you feel depressed, so come home to the Bahamas. But I also bring you greetings from my government. I serve as the ambassador at large for my country in the Bahamas, traveling the world representing the people of my nation. The Bahamas is one of the leading countries in the region of the Caribbean. It is the #1 destination for tourism in the region. And we've built a tourism product that is known around the world. This is my family. My wife is with me today. Please stand up. This is my wife. She's here with me for the first time. I thought I'd put this picture up just in case you thought the photographs were painted. This is real. And every year we do something similar that Stefan and Peter does here. We also bring leaders together from around the world. And most of these are politicians and corporate executives and athletes and musicians and technical people. And we also give awards to many leaders every year. And one of our recipients recently, of course, was the President, Nelson Mandela. And we worked with many of these leaders to help develop a more effective leadership and also to assist them in impacting their countries in a way that can be a positive result for their people. One of the things that I've been attempting to do, I've been to 112 countries, and I've been attempting to help leaders understand that everything that they do affects everybody else. And today, I've been invited to talk to you about leadership and this component of this very exciting theme, the power of strength. And I was thinking about Europe, which is going through a lot of changes recently. And I wanted to address you from the subject of leadership, understanding that the power of strength is what we need most right now, because the entire world seems to be challenged by conditions that we cannot control. And I want to speak specifically on the subject of how to benefit from crisis and change. And if there was one word that describes Europe right now, it is the word crisis. No one seems to be able to control what's going on in the global environment and the global community. And this is very serious for all of us because the world is no longer a private institution for companies or nations to live in isolation. All of us are aware that we need leadership that can function in a global environment. And I want to chat with you then about leadership in changing times and focus specifically on benefiting from change and crisis, how to maximize the change and crisis in the world. And it takes a unique kind of leadership to make that happen. My objective in the next few minutes is to talk about, first of all, the need and the value for leadership, what is leadership, and how to become an effective leader in changing times. I also want to focus on the principles of leadership, the art of leadership, and how to understand the cost of making a difference in the world. And most of us in our world today are so focused on private ambition that we really don't make a difference in the world. And this is our greatest challenge. I'd like to, first of all, make a comment about our theme. Power is every human's pursuit. Every human on earth wants power. The man that is sleeping under the bridge in a city wants power to change his circumstances. The man who is the president of a country wants to retain power in order to accomplish his personal ambitions in most cases. But power, they say, is the ability to move things. It means the capacity to impact life. However, strength is different. Strength is the quality of your power, which means that you can have power, but your strength may be lacking. Don't assume that they are the same. In other words, power could be charisma in a leader, but strength is character. A lot of people got power. They can manipulate and influence people, but they may not have the strength of character. When a person has character, it protects their power. And there are many leaders in Europe who had great power, but their character was defective. And we saw them fall, and some have even gone to prison. We've got a leader in Syria at the moment who's got great power. But what about his strength? Does he have character? A person with strength doesn't need to abuse power. And this is why we need leadership today who are not just pursuing power, because true leadership focuses on strength and not power. When we talk about leadership, then, we need to understand that our world is in dire need of the right kind of leadership. And our global conditions are very, very frightening. I did a little list of some of the things that we are facing today in our world of crisis. And we have what I call the confirmation of globalization. And what that means is everyone talks about globalization, in most cases, historically as a theory. Today, we are experientially having globalism right now, because globalization is, to me, the greatest change in our lifetime. We talk about technological change, we talk about economic change, we talk about political change, but the greatest change in our lifetime is globalization. Never before in history has it been possible for one country to have a problem and every country in the world be affected. 30 years ago, if there was a problem in China, it didn't affect Switzerland. But today, it's impossible. And this is why what's happening in Europe right now is a very serious issue, because it is going to affect everybody, including my own country in the Bahamas. And so we need leadership that understands the interdependence of nations. When I arrived here and I began to experience the beauty of Switzerland, I was overtaken by the physical awe of your mountains and the beauty of this nation. And then I began to look at the price of things. And I wanted to go back to the Bahamas right away. Your mountains cost a lot. And then I understood that the Swiss franc is one of the strongest currencies in the region. And yet, that didn't impress me, because it affects your export. But also, it affects what happens in Europe, and what happens in Europe affects you. If they are your market, you cannot ignore what's going on there. So it's impossible to say that that is their problem. Today, everybody's problem is our problem. And leaders, therefore, have to think in terms of this interdependent concept always, because globalization, to me, is the ultimate crisis. Nothing happens that doesn't affect us. So I want to focus a little bit on what kind of world we live in. All of you know what it is, but I want to remind you of them. And these are just a few of the concepts that I have to grapple with every day as I travel around the world, helping leaders in every category. We have an age of globalization, the age of information, the age of mobilization, the age of communication. We are in the age of cultural diversification, the age of transformation and mergers and networking and longevity. Also, we are living in an age of technological advancement that's moving so fast we can't keep up. We also live in a world that we call social and political transition. I like to even mention basically number 5, cultural transition. People are moving around so often and so quickly now, and even up to this week, we hear of people leaving Greece, coming to different countries looking for jobs, and they're bringing with them their culture, their philosophies, their religion, their ideas of life, and they're settling into many countries. And Europe is becoming really a melting pot of so many different multicultural perspectives that there can be great tension. And yet we need leaders who can manage that. And that is not just theory anymore, it's a reality. But there are two effects of change I want to remind you of. First of all, change brings more hazards. And the hazards are very common: more competition, and we have increased speed. But the good part of change is the fact that it brings also opportunities. Those opportunities include bigger markets and fewer barriers. And I believe that the global internet world has transformed everything we do. And therefore, we get the negative and the positive, the pros and the cons when we talk about change and crisis. The global fallout of all of the changes we're taking place in our world today, I would like to mention some of them. And these are real as I travel around the world. Number one, the loss of confidence in governments. People are losing their confidence in governments to solve their problems. And this is why we see people uprising in many countries against a government that they even voted for. Secondly, the world is producing what I call a loss of faith. People are losing faith in economic and banking systems and corporate organizations. They don't trust corporations anymore. And this is why even the unions are becoming in question. And then we live in a world where there is distrust in corporate business. People begin to suspect that businesses are not being fair. That's a reality in most of our countries. And then the fallout includes unemployment. And I was just listening last night to the news even here locally. So 1.5, one out of every 5 persons in Europe is now unemployed. And it's growing. It's a very sad reality, a very frightening one. Think about that. And then 54 million are unemployed in Spain alone. I wonder where they're going to go to get a job. That came out last night on the report. And that's among young people. Just about young people. They say among the youth in Spain, 54% are unemployed. Now, why is that important about the youth? Because when young people don't have employment, we have what I call a scenario for stress and destruction. Let me give you an example. Migration. People are moving, looking for survival. And then we have also brain drain. Brain drain means that people are going to be leaving their countries to survive, and therefore they are looking for opportunities in other nations. There was a time when if you couldn't find a job, you'd find work in your country and do something different. Today, if you can't find a job, people are actually leaving the country. And they are seeking employment in other countries, which means that that nation is losing intellectual capital. Also, the fallout includes cultural clash, where there are people who are not only moving and migrating, but they're taking with them their own problems and their own idiosyncrasies. And that's creating discomfort in a lot of people who are so used to their own culture. And that creates a leadership challenge. And so our world is having a tremendous time trying to decide how do we manage a world that is in crisis. I want to mention a few things about crisis because leadership must respond to this condition. Nothing happens without leadership. We cannot wait for anything to just change. Nothing changes without leadership. And the only thing that we can be guaranteed of is change itself. Because the greatest protection against change is to expect it. Even though Switzerland at the moment is experiencing a strong currency, you must prepare for weak currency. In other words, nothing remains the same. And so it takes visionary leadership to think beyond the success of the present, to deal with the possibility of the challenges after that success. Great leaders, therefore, know that nothing is permanent. And that means that the source of disappointment is usually when we believe that things will remain the same. Who would have dreamt that the nation that gave birth to democracy is now the nation that's having the worst problem? Greece. In other words, everything changes. And the greatest protection against disappointment is to expect change. And this is how you stay in control of life, because nothing is permanent except change. And this makes us leaders who expect the unexpected so we can never be disappointed. I put it to you this way then. There's a number of questions that I asked myself, and I listed 3 of them here. And this is what I am dealing with in my own organizations. First of all, our nation and our companies and organizations must be prepared to cultivate how to effectively respond to change. How do you respond to change that comes and that is inevitable? No one would have dreamt that this would be the condition in Europe 20 years ago. No one even dreamt it possible. And so we call it a crisis. No organization or nation exists in a vacuum. None of us can say it doesn't affect us. It affects everyone on earth today, what happens in the world. In the Bahamas, for example, we gain 80% of our revenue from tourism. And when the global economic environment hit the United States, which provided 82% of our tourist dollar, our nation was gravely impacted. Hotels were shut down. Taxi drivers had problems. Kids had to come out of private schools. And we never did anything. We're just a victim. No one exists in a vacuum. And so we had to learn constantly as leaders in our region that we must not just enjoy the good times, but be prepared to manage the times that are not so good. Can I put it this way? If an organization is not in the flux of change constantly, that organization is going to die. When the pace of change outside your organization becomes greater than the pace of change inside your organization, then death is close. And this is why it's important to study life beyond your success, because success itself is temporary. Great leaders, therefore, understand crisis. Crisis is defined as a circumstance or situation that impacts your life over which you have no control. Therefore, a crisis is simply unexpected, unexplained, unplanned change. And most of us are not normally equipped to handle the unexpected. Leaders are always having to respond to the unexpected. And so we have to understand crisis. It has to do with change that you didn't plan. It has to do with circumstances that destroy traditions. You know, one of the most amazing things I noticed the last few years is that the economists are very quiet. And they're quiet because all of their theories that they studied about economics has been destroyed by the tide of change, and much of their training is no longer valid. Because crisis destroys tradition. It wipes out the things that you've become expert in. Therefore, a crisis is a collision between the known and the unknown. A crisis is the clash between experience and the unknown. Have you noticed that most of the people who are being laid off are top executives in the world? And the percentage of those are much higher than expected because much of their experience has become invalid. Crisis comes to actually shake up your comfort. Crisis makes you think about your own equipped training People are having to be retrained today to do jobs they never thought necessary or possible. And this is why a crisis is something that brings stress and tension. However, crisis is not a bad thing because it disrupts tradition. It destroys systems. And right now, today in Europe, no one seems to know what to do. They're having meetings after meetings after meetings, and after every meeting, there's an argument. Because the systems that they thought they knew would work, the crisis is ignoring the system. My challenge to you then, as great leaders and entrepreneurs and those who are going to be the ones who are the architects of the next 10 years, is this: you must learn the difference between your experience and the unknown. And it means that you and I are going to have to respond to unexpected change. I have some suggestions for you, because crisis demands that we think innovatively. It destroys our systems. It introduces new problems. It also gives us the need to behave differently, because crisis cancels our known behavior. And this is many times why people go under stress and give up, because they don't know how to respond to crisis. Crisis demands new solutions to not just old problems, but to new problems. And this is why this economic forum is so important, because it's not just here for you to gain principles and precepts and networking on how to build your own business, but it's also challenging you to deal with the power of strength that can change and respond correctly to these systems of crisis. Crisis cancels tradition. It also creates innovative thinking. Nothing in life has ever been changed effectively without pressure. Most of our new inventions come from the fact that we were in trouble and we had to respond to it. So one of the great things about crisis is it literally creates innovation. It forces us to change and to progress. Every invention in the world today that we benefit from was a result of someone trying to solve a problem. And this is the reason why problems are not bad. They stimulate our innovative thinking. Crisis makes us look at our own resources in a new way. Someone asked me the other day, how do you define innovation? And my answer was, there's nothing new on earth. Everything is old. And then I said to that person, crisis is the combination of old things in new ways. I asked them a question. When was the last time you went to buy a pair of shoes? And they told me. I said, what do you call that shoe? They said, a new pair of shoes. I said, that's correct. But it's an old cow. When we call something innovation, it is simply something old combined in new ways. Everything to solve our problems in Europe and the world exists already. The problem is the combinations that we were working with are not working anymore. But we got to find new ways to use old material to combine them in unique ways that solve the problems. The clothing on your back, you call it a new suit. It's an old sheep. Your car is old iron ore or oil byproducts. It's all old. In other words, everything we call new and innovation is actually old, and that gives us hope, which means that whatever we need to solve our problem right now is literally on earth right now. We can recombine it in new ways. So crisis creates leadership. It also tests leadership. Crisis also exposes the quality of leadership that we have, whether they can think in creative ways. Crisis is also the source of development. It's also the source of refinement. It proves leadership. Crisis is in our lives to prove to us whether we are true leaders. because crisis challenges the boundaries of the leader and forces him to stretch beyond his own limitations. Crisis, therefore, creates leadership. All of the great leaders in history that you and I are acquainted with, if you study carefully, they are all products of crisis. I think about the friends that I've met who I honor so much, and many of them have become my mentors. When I first met Mr. Nelson Mandela, I was so intrigued by this man, a simple lawyer who simply wanted to run a law firm. But then he saw a problem that was a crisis. He decided not just to make commentary, but to make contribution. He decided not just to complain, but to commit to changing it. And a lawyer was transformed into a global leader. Crisis creates leadership. And it is that crisis that produces the top leaders we have in the world today. Therefore, I am excited about what's going on in the world because I believe that out of a group like this will emerge thinkers that we never knew were present. Innovative women and men who are going to take on crisis and going to test their leadership. Crisis is the incubator of leadership development. It is where leadership gets its growth and its expansion. Crisis also brings us in contact with our beliefs. Crisis tests our convictions. Crisis forces us to think about what we are as a philosophy. What do we believe? And crisis tests what we consider to be our faith in humanity. Crisis produces innovation. One of the things that I want to remind you of as we go forward in this day is that crisis has benefits. It incubates creativity. It also creates opportunity for advancement. It produces growth and development. It also creates opportunity for us to expand in new markets and new territory. I have come to believe in all my convictions that crisis ignites the passion for vision. When you can see beyond what you're looking at, you're becoming a leader. I want to spend the last few minutes talking then about how crisis leads to change. And this is very important. Crisis leads to test our maturity as a leader. Many people think that they are a leader until they run into a problem. And then crisis comes to prove what is the quality of leadership that you have. Many politicians, for example, cannot wait to be voted into power until they get into power. And then when they face the realities that are around them, they realize that the criticism that they levied on their opponent perhaps was not justifiable. It's very important then to understand that crisis will test our leadership. It helps us to understand that we need to expand our thinking. I was thinking about building our own organization. We have 5 companies that I had the privilege of building, and 3 of them are global companies. And I have to deal with the crisis like everybody else, with employees and expansion, and dealing with the demands of different countries. But here's something I discovered. You are always in control of your own thoughts. You cannot control the crisis, but you can control the way you think about them and the way you perceive them. In other words, you can perceive something in a way that causes you to have a different response. Can I put it this way? You interpret life out of how you perceive it. And this is why I am intrigued by the way the Japanese and the Asian mind thinks. I went to speak at the Sony company in Malaysia some years ago, and I had the privilege of meeting with some of the top executives there at lunch. And I began to talk to them about why is it that the Asian, wherever they go, they seem to always be successful. And his answer to me was, because we think differently. I said, explain that. He says, in our language, there's no word for crisis. I said, explain that to me one more time. He said, in our language, there's no word for crisis. He said, in English, you guys got a word for crisis. And in German, you got a word for crisis. He said, but in the language we speak, there's no word for crisis. I said, what do you call a problem? He says, we call it opportunity. So right now, the whole of Europe is saying we got a crisis. And the Chinese are saying we got an opportunity. What you call something determines how you respond to it. If something is a crisis, most people panic. If it's opportunity, most people plan. And what's happening today is a whole lot of Asian planning. Every country I've gone into, I've met the Asians. They are invading the world because as the world begins to fall into what we call a crisis, they are seeing it as great opportunity. Whatever you call a thing, that is what it is to you. And so you and I can determine what we do about what's happening in the world today. It has been said, it doesn't matter what happens to you. It matters what you do about what happens to you, how you perceive it. And so it's important for us then to remember that doing nothing is not an option. We have to respond to the situation in the world, and we cannot wait for things to change. We must become the architects of the change, and that's what leadership is about. Leadership is about not letting things happen, it's about making things happen. I challenge you then to remember that crisis demands a new pattern of thinking. Crisis demands a new approach to your resources. It creates new solutions and concepts. It also causes you to think of a new vision for the future. This is why we're having to talk about a single Europe now. It was an idea that nobody was serious about, but crisis is seeming to force the idea to think about a European federation. It was first an idea that no one wanted to talk about, and then comes crisis. We've heard the comments recently of the German government, which are very, very strong comments that maybe we need to talk seriously about, not just a single currency, but single government. What caused that to happen? Crisis. Could it be then that Shakespeare is right? Shakespeare said, "Sweet are the uses of adversity." One of the wealthiest men in America said something I thought was very interesting. He built a multi-billion-dollar company. His name is John Huntsman. He was a presidential candidate in the last election. And he said this about his experience. He said, if there is a silver lining to bad times, it is this. When facing severe challenges, your mind is normally at its sharpest. His company went bankrupt, and he was about to throw in the towel. And his wife said to him, "You cannot throw in the towel. There's got to be a way to solve the problem." And he went back and started his company afresh. Today it's one of the leading companies in the entire world, produces plastic products. He said this also: humans seldom have created anything of lasting value unless they were tried or hurting. Crisis produces the greatest leaders in history. Sir Winston Churchill emerged as a leader because of pressure. And there are so many leaders who today in this room are products of testing. And they've come into what they have to become because of pressure. I remember a young man said to me one time, he said, "I lost my job." I said, "That's fine." He said, "Why is that fine?" I said, "What do you have?" He said, "I have my last paycheck." I said, "What are you going to do?" He said, "I don't know." And I gave him an idea to invest that money in a small little product And today that product is now one of the leading products in our country. And he has become very successful. And he said to me at the end of the process, 2 years later, he said, "I'm so happy I was fired." A crisis can become your launch pad to become successful. And I believe some of the greatest entrepreneurs are going to be created out of the global crisis that's taking place right now. And most of those could be in this room right here today. Because many of us are going to be forced to have to solve problems. Crisis demands a higher level of thinking. It makes you think beyond what you ever thought possible. Positive response to crisis. It creates unity. Europe has been separate and yet trying to work together. Crisis is forcing unity. We have to work together or we perish together because of crisis. It also produces community. We heard of the European community idea for years, but now crisis is making it necessary to think seriously about that community. Crisis also brings empathy. We begin to feel other people's pain in crisis. Crisis also produces solidarity. It makes us more human. It brings us into the environment of being simple again, making us more sensitive to people. Even spirituality becomes a priority again when there's crisis. We begin to think in terms of all of us surviving. Crisis, therefore, creates friendships. Nations that used to be antagonistic against you now become your friends because of crisis. There are nations that are talking today who never spoke to each other at the level of intimacy, politically and economically, because of crisis. And this is why crisis is so important, because it helps us think of the common good, what is best for all of us. Having to consider what's happening in Greece and in Spain and other countries, everybody's having to sit down and talk about how do we solve this problem together. And I want you to know that there are two results of crisis. One is change and the other is uncertainty. And I want to focus, as we talk about this finally, in these points, on uncertainty. Leadership is required when there's uncertainty. And I want to talk about an animal that teaches us about leadership, that have taught me lessons. There are two creatures on earth that are leaders in their category. First one is an eagle. The eagle is a leader because of a number of components it possesses, but the main one is vision. The eagle can see above every other bird. But the second animal that I want to focus on in driving this point home is the lion. I've become very close to lions. I love them because lions teach us about courage. But lions are also interesting creatures. Here's a question I ask myself. Can an army of sheep led by a lion defeat an army of lions if they are led by a sheep? In other words, I've come to the conclusion that an army of lions led by a sheep will be defeated by an army of sheep if they're led by a lion. The point is, what happens to an organization or a group depends on the quality of leadership. Effective leadership can transform cowards into warriors. It can transform frightened people into bold leaders. Leadership can do that. And this is why when a basketball team or a soccer team or a football team is losing, you never fire the players. You always fire the coach. And what's incredible is that same coach that was fired can be replaced by another coach with the same players. And in 1 year, those players can win the tournament. Which means that there's nothing really wrong with the players. There was something defective in the leadership that couldn't bring out the best in the players. And so it is with leadership. Leadership determines the quality of the followers. In this situation that we have in our nations here in Europe, leadership will determine what happens in the case of surviving. Now, the lion is still a mystery to me. The lion is not the tallest animal in the jungle. He's not the strongest animal in the jungle. He's not the wisest, not the most intelligent. He's not the most powerful. And yet the lion is the leader. That means there's hope for all of us. You don't need to be the tallest, the strongest, the most powerful, the most intelligent to be the leader. What makes the lion the leader? A simple concept I discovered: attitude. The lion's attitude separates him from all the other animals. That's what makes a leader. A leader is 80% attitude and 20% skill. A lion shows up and all the other animals are nervous. The elephant is 50 times more powerful, 100 times heavier, and 200 times more intelligent than the lion, and yet the lion eats him for lunch. The giraffe is 16 times taller than the lion and 52% heavier than the lion, and yet the lion eats him for lunch. Which means that leadership has more to do with power. The lion teaches us a lesson. When the lion looks at the elephant, the big powerful monster, all that power and weight, intelligence, the lion looks and simply thinks, lunch. Why is that important? The lion reduces the elephant in his mind to a meal. So the way the lion sees the elephant affects the way the lion responds to the elephant. Instead of running away from him, he runs toward him. Leadership. And here's something about lions I thought I would never ever forget. And that is, when the lion sees an elephant, he never attacks. My wife and I have been going to Africa for the last 20 years, every year. And we always go on safari to see the lions. I love lions. And one day, we went on a safari on a boat up the river, the Carib River. We were there for 7 days on a little boat, just 3 couples with a captain. And we went up, and one of the things we saw was that we saw the moon setting, and we heard a sound. And the sound went like this. Woo, woo. I said to the captain, "What is that sound?" He said, "They're going to feed tonight." I became very nervous because we were on a boat in the middle of the jungle, in the bush. I said, "Who's going to feed tonight?" He says, "The lions are going to feed tonight." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, they are making a sound that means that they see a prey. I said, "Can we watch?" He said, "Let's follow the sound." And we went up the river following the sound, and there was a clearing of bush. And he said, "We will anchor right here. I think they're going to do it here because lions never attack in the bush." So we sat there, 6 o'clock, sun is setting, and I saw National Geographic come alive. I saw the trees falling. Suddenly I said to the captain, "Why are the trees falling?" He said, "Because elephants are coming." And the elephants came to the bush. And then I saw 5 beautiful lions appear. Little cats. The big bull ran the other elephants into the bush to protect them. And here's this big monster with 5 little lions. And I said to the captain, "Why did the lions make the sound?" He said, "Because when one lion sees a problem, a prey, they never attack alone. They make a sound. And that sound is heard by all the lions in that pride. And they come toward the sound. And they unify. And they bring the elephant down." And I saw leadership at work. The first lion jumped on the neck, one jumped on the hip, one attacked the side, one took the leg, and they hung on, dug in, and wouldn't let the elephant go. The elephant threw them around as if they were paper. And the elephant begins to throw them around as if they were nothing, and they just kept on hanging on. And after 20 minutes or so, the elephant became very tired, and the lions never let go. And suddenly the elephant fell. And I said to the captain of the boat, "How did that happen?" He said, "The lions knew that if you hang on long enough, you become heavier than the elephant." Persistence. Suddenly the elephant fell. And then I discovered that leaders, even though they are all leaders separately, if there's a problem, they got to all work together. And they got to stay with the problem until the problem falls. Europe has an elephant facing it. And every country is a lion. And my challenge is, who's making the sound? Can we hear the sound that brings all the leaders together? And instead of competing, they cooperate. Instead of fighting, they unify. Because in leadership, nothing is more powerful than unity. The solution to what's happening in this great nation and all the nations around is each nation a leader working together to bring the elephant down. This is the future of Europe, and I have great excitement that this nation, Switzerland, is going to lead the way and make the sound. Thank you very much, and have a good day.
Myles, since we are so much in overtime, I mean, we could listen for hours. Thank you so much, but no time for questions. But just one suggestion, take the Jungfraubahn and go up in the mountain, and then we talk about Bahamas and Switzerland again, okay? Thank you for being here.
Mountain.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.